Hey, Sean from the Commander's Brew. This week is a fun one. It's the Muppet Show with special guest Tatsunari. Yes, we got a theme deck for you this week featuring Tatsunari Toad Rider and his special pal Kermit. Yeah, you heard me. Anyway, let's get to it. We're going to do a deck tech. I'm not just going to give you a deck, I'm going to teach you to deck. To go through the journey of how this came about, but this is a theme deck. This is the Muppet Show. And we're going to talk about the Muppets themselves, how Tatsunari fits in, how we're going to do our guest hosts. And I think there's like a bit of a branch in the middle of the episode here where I think the guest host idea is a cool, legit idea that could work for decks in general, brewing up decks. It doesn't have to be a theme deck. But here's how it's going to work. The deck itself is a generically pretty good mid to low power deck by design. I'll get to that in a second. Tatsunari's up top, and let's read him. Tatsunari's a 3-mana commander, which is nice because we get to recast him if a couple things bad happen to him before it becomes too expensive. But the key here is that whenever we cast an enchantment, we make a Keimi or Keimi. It doesn't matter how it's supposed to be pronounced because we're going to make a Kermit. 3/3 black and green frog creature token. The fact that you can make them both kind of unblockable is nice, but the Kermits are the key. And it's the Muppet Show. It's about a theater. It's about a bunch of hilarious acts, musical guests, unusual numbers. So, if we're having a theater, we're going to need a stage. And that's where Thespian Stage comes in. Thespian Stage is a flavor land. We don't have dark depths or anything like that, but I think it's appropriate. And when it's time for the end of the show, we've got a curtains call. It's a little bit pricey, though. Maybe you don't want to spend $8 on an instant for a theme deck that's moderate to low powered. That's up to you. So it's a theme deck about the Muppets. We got to have Muppets, but to make it work a little bit better with the commander, and specifically the Kermit token, we need enchantments, and that means enchantment creatures. So I've got a few of the Muppets represented as enchantment creatures. Archetype of endurance, it's the boar, which, as you guessed it, represents Miss Piggy. This is a big creature with a lot of stats, very expensive creature. I don't think that's a problem when representing Miss Piggy. And if you're not a big fan of the hexproof thing, I'm not always. I prefer games where people can interact. I'm not a big fan of the setup so that no one can touch anybody. So maybe you want to use Boar Umbra as Miss Piggy. It's a good totem armor, a little bit less powerful, but as I said, mid to low power. That's what we're going for here. Swedish Chef is a lot of people's favorite, and we've got a brand new chef from Neon Dynasty, Dockside Chef. Having a sack outlet on the board is always very nice. It's an enchantment creature. It makes us a Kermit or drains if we've already got a Kermit. Animals represented by Roaring Primadox, although not an enchantment creature. I did want a beast, and being able to bounce a creature to its owner's hand is pretty nice. It's just a once per turn thing, which again is that mid to low power deck, but we've got a few enchantment creatures that have ETBs, so we'll take advantage of this. What about Gonzo? Gonzo was one of my favorites, and I think this is a pretty fun one. There are a couple of weirds in the deck, but we'd have to go for only blue ones, and I didn't like those. But how about this? Tribute to Hirobi? So it's a saga. So it's an enchantment, so it does count as being an enchantment, but we make a couple of rats for our opponents. But then when we sack and exile it, it becomes the Echo of Death's Wail. Remember Gonzo was always hanging out with his little rat pals, Rizzo specifically, and we also get to draw cards when we attack with this, so I think that's not bad. Would he sacrifice a rat, though? I don't know. And if we want Rizzo the rat specifically, I like Night Howler. Not a rat. This is a horror, but look at that picture. Looks like a rat to me, with a weird snaky enchantment tail. But we're saying we've got the ability to sack creatures, right? So some creatures go to the graveyard. Again, generically mid to low powered deck. So we've got a little bit of self-mill, a lot of little things that Sultai likes to do built into one. I can't forget Fozzie. There aren't any bears that are enchantments, and I didn't want to just put a plain bear. I did want an enchantment, so Bear Umbra works out perfectly. And it's pretty powerful, being able to untap all of our lands and get a second batch of mana. It's probably why this card's $5. After the reprint, used to be 15. And again, if it's a bit too pricey for your theme deck, Stuffed Bear, It's 2 mana to become a 4/4 green bear artifact creature until end of turn. Not a good card, but Fozzie was not a good comedian, according to some. What about Rolf? Remember Rolf? Piano playing dog? I think for him, we're going to do something like Greater Tanuki, which actually is an enchantment creature dog. So I think that works out perfectly. You got to fudge the flavor to imagine the channel ability, but I'm going to chalk that up to Rolf not being around that much. Rolf is not anyone's top 3 Muppets anyway. So you channel this, you get a basic. Where's Rolf? I don't know. I haven't seen him. Works for me. Speaking of Muppets you haven't seen, though, Wayne and Wanda, there's an obscure cut for you. Gisa and Geralf. Now, I don't have a ton of zombies in the deck, so I don't know that this will be very strong, but it's a nice pair on the deck. You know, they work well together, which is Wayne and Wanda's thing. Oh, you don't remember Wayne and Wanda? Well, I wonder why that's true. Wayne and Wanda. Perhaps the least Muppetiest Muppets that there ever were. A classically trained song and dance duo who aimed to bring the classics to life to the delight of any audience lucky enough to see them. But there was somebody who didn't want them to succeed. Could it be a coincidence that every single one of their numbers ended in a horrible accident? It seems more likely that someone wanted them to fail. We do know that Kermit the Frog fired them, but we were never told why. All we know is that after season 1 of the original Muppet Show, they were never seen again in the Muppet Cinematic Universe. Okay, so I've illustrated that we've got a bunch of stuff going on. A little bit of self-mill, a little bit of sack outlets, a little bit of graveyard wanting to be full, that sort of thing. It's classic Sultai. It does a little bit of a lot of things, and we've decided not to go heavy into one direction. But for the theme of a Muppet Show, there was always something going on backstage, some sort of mishap that carried through the episode. One time Fozzie was trapped in a magician's box. He had to do the whole show from inside there, just as muffled jokes. People had to push him around to get from place to place. Dudley Moore hosted one time. It doesn't matter who that is if you don't know, but he brought a robot to sing duets with. But of course, that robot went haywire and started terrorizing people backstage. These are the kind of things that would happen on the show. It's why I really love the show. It kind of brought a through line to an otherwise ordinary variety show. This is no different. We've got some backstage mishaps as well. We get to make a Kermit token every time we cast an enchantment, but maybe this mishap is that Kermit keeps getting sacrificed. Evolutionary Leap makes a Kermit and also sacrifices a Kermit to get another creature, probably an enchantment creature, to make another Kermit and try it all again. Undercity Informer, though not an enchantment creature, is a great way to sacrifice creatures to get some self-mill going. That's another great way to fill up the graveyard, as we like, and you know what? Sorry, Kermit, you're getting sacrificed again. And then something like a Simple Victimize, just 2 creature cards for the price of 1 Kermit. Sorry, pal. That's Kermit for you, always putting the show above his own well-being. Okay, there's always a guest host, and of course we had to build this into the deck, but here's where I think you can kind of look at this either as a theme deck or as a whole new way to brew decks entirely. A while back, we did a true Voltron where we brewed 4 mini Lieutenant Commander decks, mash them together, and that's the deck. The premise was that each quarter of the deck kind of worked well together, and as a whole, it all worked a little bit together. This is kind of the same deal. We're going to brew 98 cards. I keep saying mid to low powered. That's because they all do a little bit of everything, but each guest host focuses on one of those things. So depending on which guest host you have in the deck, which of these side cards you're going to shuffle in at the beginning of the game, it kind of amps up that aspect of the deck, giving each time you play a different flavor. The guest hosts. And then when you reveal it, you probably want to flip the top one and be like, it's the Muppet Show with special guest, whoever it is. I put together 7 special guests, 1 for each mono, 1 for each color pair, and a Sultai combo. So without further ado, it's the Muppet Show with special guest. Sir Conrad the Grim, mono black. Sir Conrad does a lot. Cares about creatures dying, which goes with our sack theme. Cares about cards going into the graveyard, which is our self-mill thing. Cares about creatures coming out of the graveyard, which is our reanimator thing. And Sir Conrad has a dash a mill on the card as well. Very nice. Some cards specifically to go with Sir Conrad are something like Season of Renewal. Generically good instant, getting 2 things back from the graveyard, but since we have so many enchantment creatures, it's probably 2 creatures. That means 2 triggers for Sir Conrad. And of course, Journey to Eternity is an excellent enchantment, makes a Kermit. We're going to sacrifice the creature it's on right away to get it flipped into the land. And now we can just bring stuff back out of the graveyard whenever we want, triggering Sir Conrad, triggering all sorts of other stuff. Great card in the deck. Next guest host, Arasta of the Endless Web. Now, there's no real big spider theme, and you can't really synergize your deck with this by forcing your opponents to play instants and sorceries. They're going to do what they're going to do. But this card will lend us to a bit of a go-wide strategy, so we threw a couple cards in here that plays into that. Glorious Sunrise is a great example. It's an enchantment. That's another Kermit. And if we have Arasta and a lot of spiders, we're probably going to choose the +1/+1 and trample till end of turn. But we've got 3 other great options if we don't have Arasta, or if our board isn't terribly wide. This enchantment works with no matter what strategy we're doing. Champion of Lamholt is another one of these things. We've got a little bit of reanimation, so we are often putting more creatures into play, so we're getting counters on Lamholt as we go. Arasta just does so way, way faster and makes her whole team unblockable. Love this card with Arasta. I like it with everyone else. That's kind of the theme here. Who's our mono blue guest host? Cosima, God of the Voyage. The front side is sort of a generic draw ability. We just get to put counters on and eventually bring Cosima back and draw a bunch of extra cards. But I think I like the Omen Keel. It's a vehicle that lets us exile opposing cards and play lands out of that. Now, I put a few extra vehicles in the deck, right? This is the beauty of this style of brewing. Now we get to look at, well, are there any artifacts that are generically good in a mid to low power deck that we could just put in here to take advantage when the Omen Keel is the guest host? Yes, there are. Smuggler's Copter is a great one. I love the looting. I love putting cards in the graveyard that I can reanimate a bit later. I love when Cosima is the Omen Keel, exiling 3 of your cards and taking a land from you. Only cruise for 1, 2. I do love this card. In the mana rock category, Cultivator's Caravan is a favorite of mine. It's a typical 3 mana rock that traps for any kind of color mana, but cruise for 3 to become a 5/5. That's pretty good too. And Conqueror's Galleon, although once it hits, it ceases to become a vehicle anymore, but I love any excuse to flip this. And again, looting, drawing, getting stuff back out of our graveyard. It goes in the deck perfectly. Now for the duo color commanders, the Dimir was the hardest. A lot of the Dimir commanders really kind of ask you to be highly synergistic. And as I said, that's not the point of this deck. We can't get super synergistic to keep a little bit of every kind of flavor. We want to be a deck of all trades, as it were. So I picked a commander that sort of is that too. Veil of the Nightclad doesn't really synergize in a huge way with much. It just has Intimidate, and she gives other creatures you control Intimidate, so we're able to get through for a lot of damage. And, that's what Vila brings to the deck. Just kind of being able to attack and just win a game that way. Not the most supported. So if we really were comparing this to the Muppet Show, this would be that one that James Coco hosted. Look it up if you want to. I'm not going to go any further there. I mean, I don't know. Are there any cards that work great with Vela? Tend the Pests, maybe? Sack a big creature, make a bunch of little 1/1s that when they die, we gain a life, but also now your opponents lose life because of Vela. Honestly, though, Tend the Pest goes even better with our Golgari guest host, Dana Soul Steeper. We want to think about life gain now. I mean, Tend the Pest specifically works pretty nicely. Every one of those pests that dies, we gain a life, and therefore our opponents lose a life. Dina's also a sack outlet. Dina can sacrifice Kermit a bunch of times for our backstage mishap angle. And we want to look for cards that help with Dina, that have occasional life gain, repeatable life gain, but that are also pretty good on their own in case Dina's not our guest host. Pontiff of Blight fits the bill perfectly. giving all your creatures extort. I mean, we've got other ways to bring cards back to our hand out of the graveyard. Being able to cast a little creature and extorting 3 or 4 times makes massive drains on our opponents if Dina's on the battlefield, and decent drains if she's not. Another mana rock that suits us is Pristine Talisman, or as we like to call it around here, Christine Talisman. 3 generic, colorless mana. That's not great, which is why we're mid to low powered. Again, not to beat that over the head, but that's kind of where we're going with this. Kind of what makes it work. Who's the Simic Commander guest host? Lonus, Cryptozoologist. So now we're talking investigation. We want more clues to be able to investigate more, to be able to use Lonus's ability to the max. But as always, is it good on its own? Good enough. Tamio's Journal. Every upkeep we get a clue. I do like the repeated ability to tutor for something. Now, if you don't have Lonus, maybe we're not going to get a ton of clues that fast. Maybe we're not going to tutor, but I don't mind a little bit of extra draw, just kind of waiting for me. Ongoing Investigation's a nice one too. We already can make Kermit and Tatsunari sort of unblockable, with their ability to make them not be able to be blocked by creatures with reach or flying. So we're going to be able to investigate with this. We can also exile a creature from the graveyard to investigate and gain 2 life. That works well with Sir Conrad. This works with Dina as well. I love these little synergies that go on. And again, if Lonus is the guest host, we've got lots of ways to make clues that we're going to be cracking that journal or using Lonus to steal stuff out of our opponent's deck in a big way. And then generically good Tireless Provisioner, right? We get those landfall triggers. If Lonus is our guest host, where you can be sure we're going to make treasure tokens. But if Lonus isn't, maybe we want those food tokens instead. I don't know. It works both ways. So who's our Sultai commander? Who is the guest host that represents the triple colored pips? It wasn't uncommon in the Muppet Show to have a couple guest hosts, a duo as it were. So that's Ikra Shadiki the Usurper and Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator. Ikra Shadiki has a little bit of unblockability synergy to gain us life. Ikra Shadiki won't be in the deck with Dina. They are opposing guest hosts, so that doesn't really do a thing. And Malcolm is the only pirate in the deck, so that's also not going to result in a ton of stuff for us. So they're not so great as partner commanders, as a duo, as a guest host, but that's also true of a lot of hosts of the Muppet Show. And so if that's not good enough for you, I would probably roll around onto Tasigur the Golden Fang. Again, not specifically synergistic with a lot of what's going on. We are self-milling a bit, so we will have the ability to delve ourselves with Tasigur, but Tasigur's just pretty good, which I like with this deck. So what a fun brew. We made the Muppet Show Massacre, as I like to call it, and it's a fun deck to brew, but I really love this guest host angle. It's a little bit of a spin on a secret commander. It brings a lot of life to the deck, especially if you want to just randomly flip whoever it is off the top before every game. I think that can be a lot of fun. If you really wanted to, you could just make 7 cuts and just put all of these legendary guest hosts in the deck to begin with and just have everybody running around at once. Just different synergies popping up here, popping up there. Sometimes this part of the deck is accentuated, sometimes another part is. I think that's a fun way to go. And I know I've talked about mid to low powered a lot, like 4 or 5 kind of level, but doesn't this feel a bit like a precon now to you? Just doing a little bit of everything kind of good. And precons tend to be 4s or 5s. So I think, did I just invent how they do precons? Either way, I think this is a fun way to brew a deck. And if you're feeling a little stale, if you maybe got a color wedge that you really like brewing around, but you're not sure where to go, try something like this. Just make it kind of low powered, kind of generically good with lots of fun surprises in it. I think this is a great deck to lend to someone who's a little bit new to the game. So lots for them to discover, and they might have a good time figuring out how the pieces work together. So that's it for the episode. I want to thank you for watching, and I want to thank you for being you. The world's a better place for it. See you later.